What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to unit number 6, Modern World, part 1 on the World Wars, and this is section C, Between the Wars. A lot of different numbers and ideas here, just trying to keep it in order in case you ever go back. So the last video, we kind of ended off with the Treaty of Versailles and kind of the problems that arise as a result of it. And in this video, we're going to kind of get into this period of the 1920s into the 1930s, just this kind of first part of what's going on in between World War I and World War II. We'll do another part on that as well, which is kind of the lead up to World War II. So let's rock and roll. Let's do this. So here's the deal with this. First things first, we are looking at the 1920s. This has a different names and different terms, whether you're more of a U.S. person or European, but there's really kind of one theme going on around here. There's a lot of like newness, if that's even a word, after World War I. A lot of people after wars are just kind of excited. Sometimes there's technological advancements during wars, and we see kind of the social and cultural changes as a result of some of those inventions. And in the 1920s in the United States, it's usually called the Roaring Twenties. There's kind of this newness in around the world, but there's also like a pushback sometimes against this newness. So some people don't like the change, and some people are really happy about the change. So we kind of have a conflict of interest, essentially. So a couple of things I just want to point out. There's really this economic boom after war. And we see this in a lot of wars, actually, where once the war's over, there's this economic improvement, and people want to spend their money, and people are excited to do stuff. So we do have these flappers in the United States. Just want to kind of point out that women, kind of connecting back to World War I, they're asked to participate in the war in terms of working in factories and helping with the war effort. And the war's over, and we have a lot of younger people who were teenagers during the war who are now in their late teens, early 20s, and a lot of women feel liberated in terms of being able to express themselves. We have short haircuts, which were unheard of before this, short dresses, which were unheard of before this, and also this movement of Art Deco. If you like art, this is kind of this new idea of the way art is done in the United States. So we kind of see these new interpretations in terms of, and also buildings as well. So something like the Empire State Building is in this Art Deco movement. Also, in a lot of Western countries, we're going to have women's suffrage. And remember, suffrage doesn't mean a negative. It's not suffering. Please don't confuse the two. We're talking about women's suffrage. Women are going to get the right to vote in many Western countries. So when we say Western countries, again, we're talking Western Europe, the United States, Canada. So women have been, even before, in the previous time period, we talked about kind of this rise. It's a synthesis. We talked about this rise of women's kind of feminism and push for suffrage. And it's in this time period of 1900 to present where women actually finally get the right to vote in many of these countries. They've been pushing for it for a while. And then after the war effort, at least in most of these Western countries, because women participate in the war and their activities in protesting and demanding their right to vote and being included, they finally get it. A lot of men thought that women couldn't handle the rough and rugged nature of politics, that it would be too difficult for them, and they needed to stay in what is called their sphere. And the woman's sphere up to this point was really domestic, and that women should be at home. They should learn a little bit about politics to educate their children, but really that was their sphere. In this time period, women finally are allowed to be taken out of that sphere and are given the right to vote. So really kind of an important thing in Western countries. Also in the 1920s, we have the invention and like the kind of the beginning of the mass production of automobiles. This is the time of Ford's assembly line production in the Model T, which you see here. Popularity of sports are going to grow. So this is the time of the Murderers Row and the 1927 Yankees. We have Babe Ruth here, Lou Gehrig, kind of these iconic figures in sports, not outside of New York, just in the whole world. These are names that are familiar to people. Also, we have the invention of jazz music. And if you know jazz music, it's very improvisational. It's very new. It's different. It utilizes different musical techniques than past music had. So it really kind of takes off, especially among the young people. We see a lot of, for example, flappers who are going to go to jazz clubs. So this is kind of the newness. All this is great through most of the 1920s. And then in October 29, 1929, the stock market crashes. And if you remember in the past time period, we talked about the emergence of stock markets as a means to invest your money into companies and hoping that the company does well, and your stock price, what you own in that, and remember, stock is just a piece of that company that you own, goes up. And if it goes up, you make money. So this is the Dow Jones Industrial Average or Stock Index. And the Dow Jones is American companies. The the Dow Jones kind of combines these companies' averages to try and figure out, or the companies to figure out how well the stock market is doing. So this is where the stock market was in 1920. And you can see this economic rise through 1925, 26, and then up until right before the stock market crash, there's this surge of prices. So the stock prices in the 1920s are going up, which means the value of those companies is going up. But in many cases, the value of these companies were overinflated. And by overinflated, I mean the stock prices were higher than probably what the company was actually worth, but people were okay with it because they were making lots of money. And then October 29th, and then in the subsequent time, in the subsequent years, we see this decrease in the stock market. So between 1929 through 1932, check out this downfall here where the stock market just takes a total crash. And what happens is billions of dollars are going to be lost in this, because if you own a stock, let's say, and you own the stock here and it was 100, let's say you own a stock in Ford Motor Company, and up here, let's say it's worth $100 a share, for example. On October 28th, 1929, it's worth $100 a share. And then the stock market crashes and your $100 share, that piece of paper that you had that was worth $100, is suddenly worth $30. So you have lost $70 over the course of the day because no one is willing to pay $100 for that stock anymore. And you should have sold it when it was $100, but you held on to it. And then it keeps tumbling because you think it's going to rebound, but it doesn't. And it keeps going down and down and down. So this is what happens to people's money. There's a lot of people who have invested in the stock market who are working class, middle class people who lose their entire life savings. And the reason why this is significant is this causes a global, and along with other reasons, this causes a global worldwide depression. It's not just in the United States. We have an interconnected global economy as a result of increased trade in the last time period. So everyone's economy is intertwined. If the US is losing money and there are people poor in the United States consumers aren't buying products from other countries. Not buying products from other countries is going to impact the economy of, for example, South Asia or East Asia. So their economy goes down. And when their economy goes down, their people have less money, and we're going to see rates of unemployment increase there as well. So we see in the 1930s, the beginning of this Great Depression, which is we're going to see increased in poverty, high unemployment rates. We're talking 25, 30% in some countries, where 3 out of every 10 people who should be able to work can't get a job. And there's going to be a question over what's the government's responsibility in answering this crisis. And remember, we've kind of this off and on through the early 1900s about whether or not the government should intervene, or whether or not, remember, laissez-faire, we should be hands off. The government shouldn't do anything. And in the United States, we have a man, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who actually, in 1932, he's elected president. His philosophy is this, what he promises the Americans is a new deal with America, and that the government is going to directly intervene in the economy. This is the exact opposite of laissez-faire. In fact, if many historians look back on FDR's programs and say a lot of these programs that he has is more socialism, where we're going to take money from the government and we're going to spread it out to those who need it. So things that you know today, like Social Security, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, he is going to be the one to create Social Security. And if before this Social Security program, no one had, for example, a Social Security card or number. And what it says is, as you work over time, the United States government will take money out of your paycheck, save that money, and then when you retire, we will give some of that money back to you for your retirement, so you don't go broke when you're 70 years old because of the downturn in the economy. So what FDR focuses on is ways to improve the economy through what's called relief, so giving people money, recovery, so how can we fix this system in terms of building it back up again, and then reform. How can we make sure these things don't happen again? So this is direct intervention in order to try and fix this. By comparison, other places didn't respond. So, for example, in Germany after World War I, a new government called the Weimar Republic is created, and that government doesn't really do anything to solve the country's problems, and their economic downturn just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. For example, in 1919, and this is really kind of I'm going to simplify this a little bit. Imagine 1919, it cost 170 marks to buy 1 ounce of gold. in Germany. And let me change this instead of gold just so it's a little simpler and say a loaf of bread. Let's say a loaf of bread costs 170 German marks. It sounds like a lot, but don't worry about it. Let's just say 170 marks for a loaf of bread. And then inflation happens. And by September of 1919, $499 for a loaf of bread. And then by September of 1923, it cost 269 million marks for a loaf of bread. And then by November 30th, we're talking $87 trillion. This inflation gets horrible, and people are losing money, and it's causing issues with people who are retired and people who have savings. People start making blocks out of the money because it's easier than buying blocks for your kids. This is a $20 million bill right here, a German mark. So this horrible stuff happens, and people in Germany are desperate to find something to latch onto. And what we see is we're going to see in 1932, through an election, he does not take over violently, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party take over. They are going to promise the people that they will overturn the Treaty of Versailles, that they will fix the economy, that they will bring back German power. And he is what we would call a fascist. This is in many ways, they compare this system to the New Deal system, where Roosevelt is pumping money into the economy. He's trying to provide relief for people, create jobs, different kind of jobs, whether it's painting, whether it's building things. And this is the Nazi plan. Nazi plan is fascist. And the whole idea of being a fascist is it puts the state before the individual. The country is more important than you. You mean nothing. What is important is our country as a whole. And you sometimes need to make sacrifices, whether it's freedoms or liberty or equality, in order to have a better country. He's also hyper-nationalist. It's not just like we're okay, we're a good country. It is we are the best country. We are the greatest country in the world. And any other country that doesn't think that needs to be invaded. He's also a totalitarian. Say it with me, totalitarian, meaning that he has total control over everything. Think of this in terms of like a dictator who determines all aspects of culture and the world. If you disagree with him, you are arrested. So he controls culture, he controls religion, he controls economic systems, everything. And his goal, and again, this is in comparison to Roosevelt, is to make Nazi Germany economically self-sufficient, where they don't need to rely on other people. And the focus, so we're going to cut off trade. If you don't like our agreement in trade, we're going to cut off trade with you. If you don't agree to our terms, we're cutting off trade with you. We don't need you because we are Germany is the mentality. Also, there's a focus on building up the military. We're going to take the money that we need and we're going to put it into the military. We're going to hire people to build military equipment. We're going to hire people as soldiers, and the military is going to be our focus. This violates the Treaty of Versailles. Other countries should be invading Germany to stop them from doing this, but no one wants to go to war again. So this is the beginning of Hitler and his fascist policies. The reason why people are going to support this is I want to just point out in 1932, unemployment in Germany before the Nazis take over is at 30%. By comparison, in the United States, it's 23% the exact same time. By 1938, it's down to 2% in Germany. So it went from 30% unemployment to 2%. We're talking 5.1 million new jobs. In the United States, unemployment in 1932 is 23%. And in 1938, it's still at 19%. So people around the world are going to look at what Hitler does and say, oh my gosh, he's got the whole thing figured out. What a brilliant genius. There's anti-Semitism, meaning there's hatred towards Jews at this point, but there's no concentration camps yet. We're not killing people. We just see these outward signs of segregation. And many people around the world are anti-Semitic, which we'll get into in the next part at this time. So many people look at this German miracle and many people say, wow, maybe we should have a fascist government. Maybe what Roosevelt's doing with this New Deal with government intervention is not the right way. And we're actually going to see Nazi support around the world, including the United States. So we're going to see some propaganda stuff that he's going to use. So some posters. This is a anti-African American, or in this case, just anyone of African descent, but really focus on African American here. We got some ideal Germans. He's going to create radios for everybody so you can listen to his speeches. We're going to have these mass rallies and speeches, which we'll talk more about and look at some clips in class. And then you also have some people who are going to protest. You have this guy right here who refuses to do the Nazi salute. And last but not least, I just want to point out something's going on in Japan as well, where the military is taking over the government. Remember the Meiji Restoration in the last period, and they are also hyper-nationalistic. We'll get into more of them in the next video, but that's all I got. Any questions? A lot of information here. Write it down. Talk to me. Ask me some questions. Have a good day.